That's Debatable is sponsored by MB&G. MB&G are specialists in the esoteric world of vehicle and furniture warranty insurance, delivering quite marvellous customer service, prompt claims payment, and a highly developed understanding of how to deliver these products in a way that is both compliant with the regulations and attractive to customers. To find out more, call Paul Smith, the Managing Director, on 07887 501 441. That's 07887 501 441.
And welcome to That's Debatable, the weekly podcast of the Free Speech Union. Well, I say weekly, but we've obviously had a few weeks off now for the summer holidays. But Connie here has been down to the seaside having fun and hijinks down in Margate. So tell us a bit about that, Connie.
Yeah, so we've spoken about it before, and you may have seen on our social media that we are legally challenging or have threatened to legally challenge Thanet District Council's new public spaces protection order. Last summer, they tried to pass a very similar one, but we challenged it, or we threatened to legally challenge it if they went through with it, and they pulled back and decided not to do it. And then this year, they have tried to rewrite it, but it's still not good enough. And so we have threatened again to challenge it. And basically, these public spaces protection orders are almost like a mini law that councils can just pass. And so it means that in their area, certain things are banned, and you could be subject to a fine. And usually it's to tackle antisocial behaviour. And that's what Thanet District Council is trying to tackle. The issue is that in order for a public spaces protection order or a PSPO to be lawful, it has to be addressing a very specific issue, such as defecating, unfortunately, in areas in public, or really aggressive behaviour and actual harassment and abuse towards members of the public from others. The issue is that in their current version of their PSPO, which they have passed, it is so broad that people who, for example, swear in public without being aggressive towards anyone could be fined up to £100. So there are three main sections actually that we're challenging. One is what we've called the swearing ban, and that's where they have said that foul language, if it's used in public, is subject up to a £100 fine. Obviously, foul language is an extremely broad way of characterising whatever they mean by foul language. But there is an issue in Margate. Basically, it's 3 towns that Thanet District Council has jurisdiction over, and that's Margate, Ramsgate and Broadstairs. And there is a serious issue of antisocial behaviour in those areas, but it's so broad that it's actually infringing, we're arguing, on people's speech rights. So, for example, if you just stub your toe and swear, under their version of the PSPO, you could be fined up to £100 for doing that. The second category that we're challenging is what we've called the humiliation ban, and they have said that people need to be prevented from humiliating or degrading others, because there's a specific issue with women and girls being harassed in the street. But the issue is, again, that it's so broad that we think even taking the mickey out of your mates could be classed as something worthy of up to £100 fine. And then the third one is the excretion of bodily fluids. And that's what the term they have used to tackle the fact that people are defecating in the street. But because originally they said excretion of bodily fluids, that means that they've also technically banned crying, sneezing, breastfeeding, menstruating, anything like that from public life.
So is it that we actually think that officers would be, enforcing these things, or are we just concerned in principle with bad law?
It's both. It's both. So I think there is an argument to be made that because there are serious issues with antisocial behaviour in Thanet and the public do want something to be done about it, I've read the consultation, that actually this PSPO, instead of tackling those serious issues, because it's so broad, they'll be able to tackle low-hanging fruit without actually tackling the serious issues that need to be tackled. So by having the PSPO, they could say that they're doing something about it, but actually they're going after people who aren't being threatening at all and are likely to just say, oh, I didn't realise that I wasn't allowed to swear in public, even though I'm just talking to my friends, or I didn't realise I wasn't able to mock my friend, and or take the mickey out of someone they didn't know, and that person found it a bit rude, and they've now reported me to the local authorities. And it's quite interesting because Councillor Heather Keane, who's on Thanet District Council, when she's done interviews with the press, she keeps using the term upset, i.e. people should not have to be upset in the street, but we can't criminalise something because people feel upset about it. That's not how the law works, neither does free speech rights work. So that's why we're challenging it, because it's so broad. And I think Thanet District Council, from the council meetings that are live streamed on YouTube for anyone to see, they seem to think that we have a specific issue with them, when the reality is that we have a spreadsheet of every council in the country who have these PSPOs, and we can only challenge them when they come up for a renewal, and theirs came up for renewal, so that's why we went after it. Anywhere else, when it comes up for renewal, there's no reason why we won't be going after that as well.
Yeah, oh, that's really helpful, because I know obviously there's a lot of concern at the moment with things like catcalling and street harassment, and there's a lot being talked about that. People have very mixed views on whether the extent to which it's happening, who's doing it, and how serious it is for women, what should be done about it. And also, a lot of us wouldn't like to hear loads of swearing, especially if we're out with our kids in the middle of a day in a seaside resort. But the thing we're concerned about is that these officers will have so much discretion to make decisions, and also would they potentially be incentivized to actually issue these fines? I think I've read that elsewhere, when these PSPOs are kind of enforced, is that there's some kind of incentive for the council to impose these fines. So,
well, one perception for the public, when we spoke to someone in I think it was in Ramsgate, he said this is clearly just a way of the council making money. If the council can make up to £100 when they hear someone swearing in public, then that is an incentive to get the low-hanging fruit, rather than going after people who were actually being abusive towards members of the public.
Yeah, so it's a kind of, yet again, another example of where there's not enough proper policing, and then other things are filling the gap.
Yeah.
But those things have a chilling effect on lots of normal people's liberties, people who are essentially law-abiding people. So tell us a little bit about what it was like down there. I mean, what response did you get from the public?
So when we went down there, we had quite a few members of the public, because we'd advertised the fact that we were going to be down there at 10:30 on Tuesday morning. We had some members turn up to support and see what we were doing. We had 2 of our ad vans that you can see on the social media videos, that are big screens on the ad vans. We'd made mock-up fake adverts for the council advertising their PSPO. Another one of the things that is in the PSPO is the misuse of public spaces, which is really ill-defined as well. So one of them said, "Are you taking work calls on the beach?" Remember, it's a crime to misuse public spaces, because you should be working on the beach. Just silly things like that genuinely are actually under their PSPO possibilities, that someone could be fined for that, because it's so poorly defined. But yeah, lots of people that we spoke to, interestingly, didn't even know that it was a thing. So they couldn't comment on it on an interview, because they didn't know about it, which I think is a story in itself, that the public are not aware that this is what their council are doing. And those that were aware of it, or when we explained to them what was going on, were shocked that this was happening, and not happy at all. And one of the guys that we spoke to felt that there are lots of issues in the area that Thanet Council has jurisdiction over, and it felt like to him very much as though they were spending money on things that really weren't that important, when they could be tackling, like I was saying, the actual antisocial issues, rather than people who just happen to swear in the street. But we did get a good reception, and I think we sent our message across. And interestingly, and this is important to note, that the day that we announced that we were going to Thanet, Thanet District Council actually did then revise the section about excreting bodily fluids. So it is specifically about defecating. But they've revised that now, but they haven't revised all of the other sections. So we're still challenging that.
Oh well, that's really helpful to have it all explained, I must say, because I was trying to follow it, and I did sort of tune into the council meeting and watch some of that, and it, yeah, eye-opening thing to be watching on a Wednesday night or something. But it relates to what we were going to talk about next, actually, which is the visit to the UK by US Vice President JD Vance, and the coincidence of his visit with a report that came out from the US State Department, which is called the Human Rights Report, which comes out every year. But this year apparently has been delayed because of the transition from Biden to Trump. And it's been a kind of political and a culture wars kind of issue, this report, because it was accused of being kind of monopolized by a sort of left human rights type agenda in the past. This is an international report that reports on all loads of countries from around the world that the US might have dealings with, and obviously with the US's kind under Trump's reorientation towards lots of different developing countries, as well as China and Russia over the Ukraine, etc., that kind of thing, then you can see there's been a big sort of political hoo-ha about this particular report in the States. Over here, it was reported in a way you might predict, which is obviously people on the left, or the kind of publications on the left, sort of saw it as purely a political attack on the UK, because in this report it highlighted free speech infringements in the UK, including public space protection orders, and then on the other side, if you like, people sort of welcomed it, saying, well, thank goodness that America is highlighting these issues. Yes, Vance is absolutely right. And it echoes what JD Vance said at the Munich Security Conference back in February, when he berated the EU countries for their kind of abandoning of free speech and democratic principles. So rather like that, there's a kind of divided response to these things. But I had a bit more of a look into the report, and there's not much to it. And partly, apparently, it's because they have actually cut it down by 2/3 compared to previous years. And one of the things they've cut out is statistics. There's no statistics, but apparently, what the authors were requested to do was to give illustrative examples, which is how you can get these examples of PSPOs and particular individuals in the UK named who have been subject to prosecution following infringements of buffer zones around abortion clinics and that kind of thing. So that helps to explain how it is that these stories are kind of coming to the attention of the deputy leader of the free world. It is a bit odd when they're talking about a woman in Scotland or a man in Bournemouth who have been prosecuted for standing outside of an abortion clinic. So, but this partly explains it, which is that the methodology's kind of changed, and it's argued that the stats are all out there anyway. This report just provides a summary with these illustrative examples. So what the report did was to kind of focus attention on France and the UK and Germany, and say that there have been significant declines in human rights over the last period. Now, the things they highlighted were public space protection orders, safe access zones around abortion clinics, hate speech. So in particular, it mentions the response to the Southport murders and the Southport riots. And it cites very precisely the think before you post video that was put out by the Crown Prosecution Service in August last year, which is warning people not to post misinformation, disinformation, speculation about the murders and other kinds of immigration-related issues. Also highlighted Ofcom's monitoring role that arises from the Online Safety Act, and warned of the dangers of ending encryption. Also raised contempt of court reporting restrictions. All these things are kind of serious issues, and also flagged up the Scottish Hate Crime Public Order Act, something that will be very familiar to our members and our listeners. So, it's clearly identifying issues that are big issues for us and for lots of other people in the UK concerned about free speech, but then also finding things that kind of resonate with this particular view that seems to be being cultivated by the Trump administration of the UK in particular, but the EU as well, kind of moving away from traditionally democratic principles. So helpful in many ways, unhelpful in other ways. I would say is my kind of summation of it. So I thought it was, it's a kind of interesting thing, and it does sort of raise the question of consistency, which obviously it can be very helpful that all of these issues are raised and are spotted, and that becoming political issues that can be brought to public attention. On the other hand, if I was looking at the FIRE website, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression organisation, which is a really excellent organisation in the States, rather like the Free Speech Union, been going longer. And they're very critical of the Trump administration, as they would be of any administration, for lots of infringements of freedom of expression and the First Amendment. So just some examples to kind of balance up the accusations thrown at the UK. Some of the examples on the FIRE website was Trump's threatened lawsuit against a pollster, Jan Seltzer, because she produced a poll in the run-up to the election that predicted that Iowa would be won by Kamala Harris. And Trump's gone for her under the Consumer Fraud Act, saying that as a pollster, the methodology of the poll was kind of inadequate. There's also been suggestions that people who burn the American flag should be jailed. Now, that's something that has been a crucial free speech issue in the past for liberals, who kind of made the case notoriously. Penn and Teller, the two magicians in the States, notoriously made a case of this. And I think they burned the American flag. It was either in the White House or at some kind of official event, to make the point that there must be freedom to burn the American flag in America. Trump's threatened prosecutions against CNN, New York Times, CBS, has excluded certain journalists from the press pool on the grounds of criticism being made of the administration. So swings and roundabouts. So I do think that while it's obviously we can cheer on the American leadership when they are flagging up free speech over here, at the same time we should kind of hold on to our cojones, or whatever you want to call it, and sort of say, well, get your own house in order as well, at the same time as flagging up what's going on over here.
What frustrates me is that I completely agree with you on that. We should absolutely be doing that. But some people, because there are free speech issues in the US, say that, well, therefore they've got no right to criticize us, and want to ignore everything they have to say and ignore all of the issues we have in this country, because they argue that the US has their own problems. So who are they to say? I know we all know that they have their own problems, but that doesn't mean that you therefore should ignore the problems that we have here. And I think that is kind of a theme running throughout the divide, the very generally, in these loose terms, the left and right divide, for want of better sort of categorization, that a lot of times people will just want to sort of say, well, I don't care about free speech when it's that side, only when it's my side. And I've noticed that a lot, that whenever people who normally do not talk about free speech, suddenly now when there are Palestine Action people, so who are supporting them, being arrested, suddenly they're saying, well, yes, there is an issue of free speech. It's like, yeah, there is. Why have you been ignoring it for the whole time? Just because it's only your side now, in a similar way that just because one side isn't perfect doesn't mean that they can't say something about this. And it is that consistency that's important. Similarly with Lucy Connolly versus Bob Villain, or whether it's Ricky Jones, just say that both have issues, not, well, this side is bad, so therefore let's also lock up that person. Everyone should have free speech, and just because the US isn't perfect doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at our own issues too. And it's a very frustrating cop-out that I think a lot of journalists who prefer to argue that the idea there's a free speech crisis is a right-wing dog whistle, they prefer to level that argument rather than just accepting that perhaps there is a problem in this country. And yes, it may be embarrassing to be called out by the US, but that doesn't mean that they don't have their own issues. Two things can be true at the same time, but that's also for them to deal with, like it's I'm perfectly happy that even if the report has been cut and it's not as detailed as it could have been, and which might have been helpful, the fact that there is such huge international pressure on the government to talk about this, and as much as it annoys me, it is also, on the other hand, funny to watch Keir Starmer squirm when free speech is brought up, and he says, "Oh, we've always had free speech and we're very proud of it and we always will." He hates it when it comes up, and so that's when it's brilliant that it is brought up by extremely powerful allies.
Yeah, well, it is very interesting what Keir Starmer has become, is that both the far left and those of us who, I don't know where we are, the politically homeless and those on the right, all kind of see Keir Starmer, or Keir Starlin as increasingly being called, and there's these brutal T-shirts with Keir Starmer made to look like Stalin with the hair. It doesn't have to go too far with the hair, with the addition of a moustache. Then, it's that idea that he somehow embodies authoritarian trends, many of which were in existence already, and many of which exist elsewhere as well as in the UK. But, it's no bad thing to be focusing on that particular issue when it comes to those who are in charge of us, especially when their inclinations are so authoritarian and avoidant, which seems to be a word that's coming up a lot. Toby was talking about it in a podcast that I was listening to with him this week, this kind of avoidance. And as soon as there's an attempt to evade or avoid really tackling a very difficult and serious issue, the alternative solution that's posed is restrictions on speech. And it goes all the way down to your Thanet example, but also all the way up to kind of online safety and all these kind of huge arenas of regulation that are potentially ways of avoiding the most difficult issues of our time that nobody seems to know how to respond to or to solve, and certainly don't want to respond to it in an honest and kind of potentially very uncomfortable kind of way. So there's some, but to kind of conclude on the US example, then some of those, the US report, then some of the other cases that have come up over this week, absolutely reinforce the fact that there is a major problem in the UK. So you highlighted just then the Ricky Jones case. Just explain to people a little bit about that. A lot of people will have heard of this.
Yeah, so Ricky Jones is the Labour councillor who last year in August, following the Southport attack, went to, I guess, counter-protest against those who were protesting against immigration. And he was stood in a crowd of what I think was a Stand Up to Racism counter-protest, and he was being filmed when he said, and I'm not quoting directly, but the main bit that he said was that they all need to have their throats cut. We need to get rid of every single one of them. And he was referring to the people who are protesting against immigration. Now, he was arrested and charged with encouraging violent disorder. And he pled not guilty and was heard by a jury, and they acquitted him in less than or just over half an hour. And lots of people have been up in arms about this because lots of people do think that what he said was far worse than what Lucy Connolly said. Not only that, but Lucy Connolly received 31 months in prison for a tweet, let alone standing in public in a crowd of people, arguably saying that that's what everyone else should be doing. He didn't say "for all I care," which is what Lucy said. Those 4 words were very important in her tweet. He said their throats need to be cut and we need to get rid of every single one of them. But I don't think it was incitement to violence, because I'm in favour of the Brandenburg test, which is what the US uses, that unless it's intended to and likely to cause imminent unlawful behaviour, then it's not incitement. And I think that unless you say, meet me here at this time on this day with these weapons to do this, I think it's best to say that it's not incitement. And his argument was that he didn't intend for it to be inciting unlawful behaviour. And obviously the jury, the other thing is that juries don't publish their deliberations, so we'll never know why they came to this conclusion that lots of people are unhappy with, because lots of people do genuinely think that it was incitement and that Lucy's weren't. That Lucy's comment wasn't. I don't think either were, and I think that the jury came to the right decision. The difference here, and why people are talking about two-tier justice, well, on the face of it, is that they think that either both of them should be locked up or neither, or that he should be locked up and she shouldn't. I think neither of them should be. But the difference, the reason why he got to be heard by a jury is because I think the two-tier justice comes in on the fact that he was released on bail. whereas Lucy was remanded in custody. So that meant that Ricky was able to not be behind bars and get that external support, really take a considered view about who was going to represent him, what his arguments were going to be, what he was going to plead. Whereas Lucy only had the duty solicitors that you get, and she didn't, it's really, really devastating that the Free Speech Union weren't able to get to her quick enough before she decided to plead guilty. Even if she had pled not guilty, she would still have had to wait for her trial behind bars, and who knows how long that would be. So it seems as though she felt that by pleading guilty, she'd get a shorter sentence and probably end up having to spend less time behind bars. And if she'd pled not guilty and not know how long, she'd have to wait in prison.
Yeah, I mean, the pressure that's on a person when they are in custody, just to get out of custody, and
Yeah.
it's totally different to, eventually having the police knock at your door. I mean, I'm not saying the police should be knocking at people's doors, but the other thing about Ricky Jones is, of course, he's an elected official, so the public can also vote him out. So there's that option as well. So we don't necessarily need to have him criminalised, for making what was altogether, albeit a offensive gesture, a violent gesture, that kind of thing. So, but it's also people have made the comparison because of the jury component of this with the Jamie Michael case, who was obviously a case of ours, who also was arrested after the commenting on the Southport murders, and he did have a jury trial because he pleaded not guilty, because we were able to get involved early on, and he had an even shorter, whatever you call it, deliberation than Ricky Jones. It was, 17 minutes, 30?
Yeah.
And he was also acquitted by a jury. So that's, I mean, I love juries. I just think everybody I know that's ever sat on a jury says, my God, it's just an incredible experience, and you realize how you go into a room thinking, oh my God, how are these idiots going to make a decision, including yourself? And then through the process of actually working with other people to kind of really make sure that that there is a collective certainty, that you end up often reaching the right decision. So that's not always, obviously, but very often reaching the right decision. So I think that's a nice point that's been made in relation to these, and it's like the difference between juries making decisions and individuals just wanting to kind of something to happen to Ricky Jones because they don't agree with him, or some people wanting something to happen to Lucy Connolly because they don't like what they've said. And there's that kind of very individuated sort of sense where people just want to silence the people they don't like. Whereas actually when things are brought before a jury, you have to consider the principles involved and the bigger messaging and the kind of the point of law, which is really healthy actually. So
the lesson is to come to the Free Speech Union straight away and nearly always plead not guilty, because I think the majority of cases surrounding supposed speech crime, if you plead not guilty, you usually are acquitted. But the point is that Lucy pled guilty and therefore didn't have a trial at all. She just went straight to the sentencing. And actually, if you read the sentencing, the judge starts talking about diversity and inclusion. So there's this other aspect that the judge wasn't just analysing whether her speech was inciting racial hatred, which was what she was charged under, whereas Ricky Jones was charged under encouraging violent disorder. He wasn't just assessing the legal aspect of what she had said. He was also making a political comment about what she'd said. And as far as we can see, although again, juries don't publish their deliberations, what was assessed in Ricky Jones's case was just the legal aspect of what he'd said, not an assessment of his own political views. Whereas the judge was clearly happy to make his views known about what Lucy had said.
Yeah, under the pressure of that time, where there was this kind of panicked response by those in authority just to try and keep a lid on the physical violence by this bizarre route that they think they can do that by keeping a lid on people's thoughts and words. So
the other ridiculous thing is that the same judge who gave Lucy her 31-month sentence sentenced a man who actually took part in the riots to 20 months. So he got 11 months less from the same judge, even though he actually took part in the riots. So in that sense, that's another example of the two-tier justice. And that's, to me, undeniable that, I mean, arguably it's an issue with the law, But whether it's an issue with the law or the judges or the police, it is still two-tier. Why are we giving longer sentences, harsher punishments to people for saying things rather than doing things?
Yeah. Good. Well, there's going to be more of this, given what's going on around the country and people's, expressing their kind of pent-up concerns about immigration, illegal immigration in particular. So let's move on to quite a different issue in some ways. The case of Robert Moss, who was a firefighter, and you've been talking about this in the media this week, haven't you?
Yes, so this broke on Saturday, and Robert Moss worked for the Staffordshire Fire and Rescue Service for 28 years, and he happened to also have been unfairly dismissed in 2021, a tribunal found. But since then, he has been active on a private Facebook group, which he has been providing guidance for firefighters, specifically about their pensions, but he's also been publicly critical of the management and the operations of Staffordshire Fire and Rescue. And his comments, which I've seen the evidence, completely anodyne, they're completely reasonable, all lawful, criticising a public body that is funded by the taxpayer, which you'd like to think is not a crime, or not yet, as Toby said in the Telegraph. But on the 8th of July, he woke up at 7 a.m. to very, very loud banging outside. He thought it was a workman drilling or something. And it turns out that there were 4 police officers at his front door. He went outside to speak to them, still in his dressing gown, and they arrested him under the Malicious Communications Act on suspicion of harassment without violence and of also, amongst other things, sharing an offensive communication. And he was invited to sit in the police car whilst 2 of the police officers went and searched his home. They seized 2 phones, a laptop, and an iPad. He was driven to the police station. He was sat in a cell for about 3 hours until the duty solicitor turned up. He had his photo taken, his DNA taken, his fingerprints. He said he felt like a criminal, as you would. And after the interview, he was released on bail, but given the most draconian bail conditions, which included not being able to talk about, not just criticise, not being able to talk about at all, referencing at all to Staffordshire Fire Service, and he wasn't allowed to speak publicly or freely about the fact he'd been arrested, which was the most outrageous aspect of this. And it was a few days later he found out about the Free Speech Union through a friend. And what's quite cool about this case, I think, is that Robert has been a trade union member for 40 years. He's a proper lefty, loves Corbyn. He's actually publicly criticised Toby previously. And he even told me that had he heard this sort of story before it happened to him, he probably wouldn't have believed it. But now it's happening to him. And so it's also, from our perspective as the FSU, we want to help absolutely everyone, and this is the perfect case of demonstrating we will defend you no matter what your political views are, no matter whether you've criticised Toby for his politics or any of us for that matter. We care about your right to free speech, and we really are non-partisan, and we will defend you no matter what. And I know that Robert, at least from speaking to him, he's so grateful, and it's really lovely that he was saying to me how, of course we have different political opinions, maybe me and Toby do to him, but what we do agree on is the right to free speech. And that's what's so great about the FSU, that we will defend anyone, of course. And so it's just a very good example of how it doesn't matter what side of politics you're on, you could be next. You could be next with the police knocking at your door. And not only the fact that they seized his devices at the time, it's 6 weeks later, and they still have his devices. So on the way, when he was offered a lift back to his house from the police station, he asked if he could be dropped off in town because he needed to go and purchase the things that they had just taken from him. He needed to, in order to go about his normal daily life, he requires access to certain technology, and he also has an elderly mother who requires round-the-clock care, and they'd taken his mobiles from him. So he's been set back about £1,000 because the police still have his devices.
No, it's such an extraordinary invasion of privacy. That, I mean, I know when some of the other cases that are similar, like the case of Julian Fuchs, the former police officer whose home was raided, and they went through his bookshelves, and it became a kind of theme, this fact that they said you've got very Brexity books. Books are one thing, books are, everybody can have the same books, they're not sort of private to you, whereas what's on your devices, it's so private. I mean, God, if somebody took mine, and I don't do anything particularly sleazy, the idea of them sort of trawling through everything, because in order to find what they think is there, they're going to have to trawl through everything. I mean, bloody hell, it's really, really, really worrying, and it should only be done in the most extreme cases. But as you pointed out, that this kind of gagging clause in his bail conditions, I mean, I've seen that in other kinds of cases where I hadn't really realised the kinds of really precise kind of bail conditions that can be imposed on people. I know people that have been arrested on protest, and they've been told that they can't have any contact with another person who was arrested at the same time, for example, when these people are part of a campaign, they're part of kind of friendship groups, they're part of social networks. So the idea that you can actually say, no, you can have nothing to do with this person, is very just extraordinary. I hadn't really realised all of that. So it's really important that these things are challenged, and often those things, if they are challenged by a decent lawyer, they will be, the judges won't have any truck with it. It's the police will chance their arm in the first instance by trying to impose these things. God knows why they think this is a reasonable thing to do, particularly to not be able to speak about the fact of your arrest. I mean, bloody hell.
Yeah,
it's
it
so
is.
kind of Stalinist. It's extraordinary.
It is just outrageous, and like you say, luckily, because Robert came to the Free Speech Union, we were able to give him a barrister who did argue in a bail hearing successfully to get those bail conditions overturned. So now Robert can speak freely about the fact that he was arrested for criticising a public body. And this was similar, basically, really quite similar, eerily similar to Maxi Allen and Rosalind Levine, who were arrested and handcuffed and detained for 11 hours because they had criticised their daughter's school on WhatsApp, and they were accused of similar things. And we're still trying to get them compensation. The other point is that Robert is still under investigation, so it's time will tell what happens. But in the meantime, he's able to talk freely now about the fact that he's been arrested. And unfortunately, like Toby said in the Telegraph, it's not really surprising anymore when these things happen. And the only ones that we're able to tell you about, like in detail, are the ones who we help. So according to custody data that the Times managed to get hold of, 30 people a day are being arrested for so-called offensive messages on social media. But we can only it's when you hear those numbers, you think, but what are they really saying? But unless you come to the Free Speech Union or Christian Concern or anyone else who's going to help, or this is where I get it, the AFD? ADF, not the AFD.
Yeah.
That's the wrong one. The ADF, who are the other American organisation who defend free speech. Then we can't talk in detail about these things. And I think that's why it's really important that people's stories, individual stories, get heard, because it's very hard when you're talking to people like Ben Kentish, who I was talking to on LBC the other day, who really do not know, clearly just don't know about these things. Hearing data like that, like Robert said, if before it happened to him, he would have been skeptical. He probably would have said, like Ben has said before, well, what did they really say, though? That surely there's a reason why they've been arrested. But when you hear cases like Julian Fuchs, like Robert, like Maxi Allen and Rosalind Levine, that really puts into perspective. But we can only get those stories out there if these people come forward and know that the FSU are out there and other organisations are out there to help them.
It's interesting that this, I have it a lot when I tell, there's either people already know about us and they know all about free speech and they're telling me things that we've put out into the public domain. They're kind of mirroring it back to us. Or quite often I meet people that I haven't met before and they say, well, what do you do? And I tell them and they go, oh, what's that? They've never heard of the Free Speech Union. And they have got not the first clue what kinds of free speech issues are occurring. And it's I was met a graduate over my summer holiday, and he just graduated and he'd never heard of Kathleen Stock. And that's not his fault. It's that he is clearly, fortunately, in an area of academia where it didn't seem that there was a kind of particularly a free speech issue. I'm not entirely convinced that those areas exist, but let's say that they do. And other people. Who was it? Somebody said to me that I met afresh. I said, what my job was, and they said, what's the big issue then? And I said, well, it's largely the kind of trans issue. And they said, what? So lots of trans people getting into trouble at work for being trans. And I sort of thought, I hadn't, talk about coming at it from a completely different sort of direction to all the people we normally meet. And you realise how far we've got to go in terms of sort of just really getting the story out there. It's extraordinary how polarised things are, and how there's a kind of massive information deficit because of the silos that have occurred. And anyway, so which kind of brings us on to the final story we're going to talk about, which is the case of David Toshack. Now, David Toshack is in Scotland, and he is formerly a soldier in the medical services section of the army. And but he'd applied for a job and actually got a job as part of the prison service, but of a kind of outsourced section of the prison service, which would have involved escorting prisoners around the UK. So he's a trainee prison custody officer was the name of the role. And as part of that, he was undergoing a 6-week intensive residential training period. And during the course of that training, it had all been going fine. He'd got good feedback, and nothing particularly alarming had occurred until the question of transgender prisoners was raised during the training. And David had then expressed the view that he didn't think people could change their sex. And when this was directly a kind of issue they were discussing from a safeguarding point of view about transgender prisoners, he said, well, I would use their chosen name and gender neutral language where appropriate, but I wouldn't use preferred pronouns because I believe that it's impossible to change your sex, and I think it's important to be clear. So, and that again, that was, he said it, and I don't think it was initially challenged by anybody. But then, as he got to the final weeks of training, pronoun usage came up again, and when he expressed his view again, he was asked to leave the session and stand outside. And then he was called in by an HR person and the leader of the course, and told he was being dismissed due to his strong beliefs, which they said made him unsuitable for the role. Now, this is a case that the FSU is pursuing, and it's a really, really important case. And if you go to our website, you can see the full story and the fundraiser that we're pushing for David's case. So at the moment, we've done everything we can in-house, and we're now getting to the stage where we definitely need external lawyers to get involved for the employment tribunal representation. The target is £70,000, and we're over halfway there already, which is great, because this is a case that really resonates with people. Doesn't involve the police, doesn't involve criminal law. It's like a lot of our cases, it involves employment law. So it's one of these things that a lot of people fear. If they may be the kind of person that never fears getting arrested, but they do fear what might happen in the workplace. So he was, when they decided to really push him out of the role, it was claimed that David had expressed himself aggressively. But this wasn't said to him at the time. This was said retrospectively. So just kind of these awful situations where people are treated incredibly unfairly. So where we're at the moment is that we think he's got a very good case under the Equality Act, because we think he's been harassed at work for his beliefs. We think he was treated less favourably and dismissed for expressing his beliefs. And we also think that the internal policies of the company that was employing him are discriminatory, and that they are unlawful as a result. So we have been very fortunate to get the solicitor Margaret Gribbin, who people might have heard of because she is currently representing Sandy Peggy, the Scottish nurse who has been cleared of misconduct by NHS Fife for various accusations, and then also is now taking NHS 5 to court because she had to encounter a man in her changing rooms on their grounds of their transgender policy. So this has got sort of similarities with that. We also think there's a case under human rights law, the Human Rights Act 1998, because the company that it was employing David performs a public function in relation to the prison service. We think they're therefore subject to Articles 9 and 10 of the Human Rights Act, and that the fact that, like the Scottish Prison Service and the NHS and the police in Scotland, who were operating as if the Gender Recognition Reform Bill in Scotland was somehow in operation, when in fact it was flawed. It was, well, both flawed in both senses of the word, and that Westminster declared it to be unconstitutional. But nevertheless, these institutions were operating as if it was fact. So we think that David's got a really good case. So if people can go on our website, freespeechunion.org, and help us to fund that case, we think it's got really, really important ramifications for lots of other areas of law and for other cases as well. So has there been press interest in that story?
Yes, quite a lot. David's not doing media himself, and that's the same with Sandy Peggy. It's just, I guess, part of how Margaret wants to go about things, which is a very sort of sensible option in these cases a lot of the time. So David hasn't done press himself, other than he was interviewed by the Daily Mail, and you can read that on their website. I did a couple of GB News clips, and they've done quite well, and there has been a lot of outrage about it. And also the fact that it's in Scotland is quite important, because Scotland is kind of at least 5 or 10 years behind sort of respecting the fact that people have gender critical views, despite the fact that it was 4 Women Scotland who took the Scottish government to court and got the Supreme Court ruling on their side, and they won. Because Scotland has notoriously been so captured with gender ideology, whether that's putting male rapists in women's prisons, or whether it's just banning books from libraries, which is another story this week, that the Women Who Wouldn't Wished has been banned from a library festival. So that's why it's also really important for Scotland. And like you were saying, Jan, not only did they tell him directly the reason why he was being dismissed was because of his strong views, which is outrageous in itself and a direct contravening of the Equality Act, but they also claimed that it was against their policy and against and not compliant with the law. So these people are really, really, I mean, I said on G, it's like they want to be taken to an employment tribunal. It's such a clear-cut case to argue that, to suggest that David's views were not compatible with the law. It's like, it's clearly whoever, and I think this because I said it's clearly something to do with the particular people who were in charge of that session, because like you said earlier on in the course, he had expressed his view about biological sex and there had been no issue, but it was in this specific safeguarding session in the last week of the training course that it was a new person running it who'd not met before, and she was the one who told him to leave the room and basically got him to go to this HR meeting where he was dismissed. So it often is the case that you can find there might not be an issue until there's one person, and this happens generally in social life, and lots of experiences that I've heard, that you can have one person's strong views can really sort of corrupt the rest of the way that the operation runs. And that can be it. And that's clearly, in my opinion, what's happened here. The fact that he hadn't met this person before, and it was only around this person that it was an issue to say this view. And no one else on the course, from what Dave has told me, they had even laughed about it a little bit, sort of, not in a mean way, but just sort of said, "Yeah, isn't the world going mad?" A little bit, sort of like that.
You would expect, the idea normal that people.
The very real possibility that you could be asked to call a male sex offender she, her. And that's how you get into the mess, that you have people like Isla Bryson or Tiffany Scott being put into women's prisons. And the other thing is that GeoAmy, who's the company who is contracted by the government who was employing David, referenced in their defence the Scottish Prison Service's guidance on trans prisoners, which still says, despite the Supreme Court ruling, that male prisoners will be assessed on a case-by-case basis as to whether they're allowed in women's prisons. So they're using law that is arguably incompatible now with the Supreme Court's ruling to justify their decision to sack David. And again, like you said, they've now tried to change their reason for sacking him. They're now claiming, after we've basically challenged him, they're now claiming that it was because of the way he said it. It wasn't just what he said; it was the way he said it. So they clearly know that they're on thin ice.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting, isn't it? You can kind of picture these scenarios. You don't really need an activist as such, because when it's embedded in the structures, then and it's been part of the political culture in Scotland. Obviously, this whole furore over Nicola Sturgeon's memoir, and the kind of, all the debate that's still going on. People saying this is still going to be a key issue in upcoming elections in Scotland. The prominence that the Isla Bryson / Adam Graham case acquired and basically brought down Nicola Sturgeon. Then by the time you get down to the person delivering the course, then they don't even need to be so certain. Well, they can be certain to the extent that everything is telling them that they're right, and that somehow this man, who is an army veteran and is clearly an experienced and responsible person, such that he's been given the job and he's just undergoing the training, is somehow somebody you can send out of a room. I mean, I just cannot imagine the scenario where, I don't know whether it's a woman or if it's a younger person, whatever, but you can sort of picture the scenario where, a proper man with life experience, who obviously knows what a woman is and what a man is kind of humiliated in that kind of way and treated as if common sense is the ludicrous kind of claim and the dangerous claim, and this sort of fanciful notion is the one that needs to be protected at all costs. So, it's a great case. I know it's been brewing for quite a long time because there's a lot of work that's had to be done, but I think it will be, on the back of Sandy Peggy and other cases, very important. So that's great. I wanted to, because you mentioned libraries, I'm now going to piggyback on that just to give a plug for an event that we're doing. So we always have a very quiet August just to give us some time to plan future events. So if you've been looking at our website and thinking, I thought they did events, we do tend to take August off because so many people are away. It doesn't seem to be worth putting on great events if the audience isn't around. So, but that all changes from the 4th of September, when on Thursday the 4th of September we've got an online event with a US author called Adam Stettler. I need to check the pronunciation. It could be Stettler, it could be Stettler. I need to check before I interview him. But he's written a book called That Book is Dangerous, and it's about the publishing industry in the US and the ways in which the kind of self-censorship has crept in, the pylons that have happened, particularly in young adult fiction. It's really, really interesting, the kind of specific dynamics of young adult fiction, which brings to mind the cases of people like Gillian Phillip, another Scot, who was a children's author actually employed in America, who was piled on and sacked for support, one tweet in support of J.K. Rowling. So that should be a really interesting conversation. It's much broader than just the kind of trans issue. It's also race issues and the way in which the weaponization of those has been used to kind of, for people to pursue all these various very toxic agendas in US publishing. It will resonate a lot with people who are familiar with the British publishing scene, and there's been some really good research on that already. So that should be a really good interview that will take place live on the 4th of September at 7:30. If you're a Free Speech Union member, you can join that for free. You just have to look for the link that will be going out. It's gone out already in the weekly newsletter. It will carry on going out. You just register to join that on Zoom, and then you'll join on the night. We'll film it as well, so it will go out on YouTube. But if people are not yet members and they're thinking about joining, events is a really good reason to join, because you get free access to all of these live events that we do online, but also you get discounted tickets for anything that you can attend in person. So it's really worth joining, besides all the reasons that we've already run through, which have been identified by the US State Department. And then we've got a very, very big event brewing for early October that I'm looking forward to announcing, hopefully by the end of this week, maybe early next. That's a very big one, but I'm going to hold back all of the names. And then we've got the Battle of Ideas Festival, middle of October, which I'm sure you'll be there, I'll be there, loads of us staff will be there, and we'll be putting on a session as well, but also discount tickets for FSU members. I think it's 20% off, which is a really, really good discount. So again, go to the newsletter. The link is only available in the newsletter to get that discount. So make sure you're looking at the Friday news update, and you can go and get your tickets now for the early bird rate, which is already reduced, but you also get an additional 20% off that with your because you're an FSU member. So do get your tickets, and we'll see you there. So I think is that it? Have we got even more stories?
I think that's everything.
Yeah. It takes a long time to get through everything. There's too much happening. Good. All right. Well, thanks, Connie. And we will see everybody next week.